We good to go, Patty?
Kevin, are we good now to begin?
Good to go.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this special called meeting of ABTEL today. Just a reminder that the meeting is open for public viewing and is live streamed on the VDOE's YouTube channel this morning. We're going to begin with introductions briefly. So as I call your name, this will also be part of our role. Would you introduce yourselves? Dr. Andrew Dare.
Good morning. I'm Andrew Dare, Dean of the School of Education at VCU.
Thank you. Nancy Welch.
Good morning, Nancy Welch, current Division Superintendent for Matthews County Public Schools, and I represent school division superintendents in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Gary Carter.
Good morning, Gary Carter. I'm with Newport News Shipbuilding, the Apprentice School, representing the business sector, manager training.
Thank you. Tracy Mercier. Philip Watt. Charlotta Williams.
Good morning. My name is Charlotta Williams. I am a classroom teacher for Norfolk Public Schools.
Thank you. Selena Dickey. Mary McIntyre.
Mary McIntyre. I am a middle school teacher representing Albemarle County Public Schools.
Thank you. Stephen Witten. Wendy Downey.
Morning, Wendy Downey, social studies teacher and department chair representing Prince William County Schools.
Thank you. Jessica Jones.
Good morning, greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Jessica Jones. I'm an agricultural education teacher and FFA advisor at Tunstall High School in the Great Pennsylvania County, representing Region 6 CTE.
Thank you. Jennifer Andrews.
Good morning. Welcome from Henrico County. I am Jennifer Andrews, a secondary special education teacher at Mills Godwin High School, representing Region 1 secondary exceptional ed teacher.
Thank you. Nancy Bradley.
I'm Nancy Bradley. I'm from Virginia Tech, and I am a citizen at large on ABTEL.
Thank you. Andy Cox.
Good morning. I'm Andy Cox, the Director of Teacher Ed at the University of Virginia's College at Wise in the far western part of the state, and I represent public higher ed.
Thank you. Peggy Schimler.
Good morning. I'm Peggy Schimler. I'm the Director of the Education Department at Randolph College in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I represent private higher ed.
Thank you. Sarah Gross.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Gross. I am a public school parent and a recent past president of Virginia PTA representing parents.
Thank you. Scott Ziegler. Travis Burns.
He is present, but he's doing announcements right now and listening at the same time.
Thank you. Cardell Patillo.
Good morning, Cardell Patillo, Chairman of the Portsmouth City School Board, and I also represent the Board of Directors for the Virginia School Board Association.
Thank you. Senator McClellan.
Good morning, Senator Jennifer McClellan, representing the 9th Senate District, which is parts of Richmond, Henrico, Charles City County, and Ashland.
Thank you. Delegate Van Valkenburg. Monica Osei. Dan Lewis.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dan Lewis, Director of Academic Programs and Policy for the Virginia Community College System.
Thank you. Is Tara here this morning?
No, she is not. She will not be able to join us due to a previous scheduled event.
Okay. Maggie Clemens.
Good morning. I'm Maggie Clemens. I'm the Director of Licensure and School Leadership at DOE.
Patty Pitts.
Good morning. I'm Patty Pitts. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Teacher Education and Licensure at the Virginia Department of Education. And Tricia, I am admitting Steve Witten now.
Okay, thank you. I'll take just another minute. Good morning, Steve. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I think he
You
was
may
just
need another
connecting.
minute. Yeah.
Tricia, this is Diane Stubbins, and I think you might have called me either when I was away or skipped over me, but I'm
I'm
an
sorry.
English teacher at Fuqua School in Southside Virginia, representing non-public schools.
Thank you, Diane. I apologize for that.
No, I just wanted to make sure I got in the quorum.
Stephen Witten. Well, he's here, middle school representative, social studies teacher, correct? Mecklenburg County. We're
Yes.
happy to have you. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I just found my link. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You want to do a quick introduction?
Yes, I'm Steve Whitten. I'm sitting in my classroom with my kids right now for a few minutes, and I teach 6th grade language arts in Mecklenburg County.
Thank you so much. I am Tricia Storehunt. I am at the University of Richmond, and I represent private institutions of higher education. We do have a guest this morning, Christania Brown. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christania Brown. I am the History and Social Science Coordinator at the Virginia Department of Education.
Thank you, Christania, and welcome. Have I missed anyone else? And again, I apologize, Diane. We have to quickly approve our agenda, which has just 2 action items today. So is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I approve.
Thank you, Peggy. Is there a second?
Second, Nancy Bradley.
Thank you, Nancy. Andrew Dare, do you vote to approve the agenda?
Yes, approved.
Thank you. Nancy Welch.
Yes.
Gary Carter. He may have stepped out.
No, ma'am, I'm here. I was having a hard time finding my mute button. I'm here. Yes, I approve. Aye.
Thank you. Mary McIntyre.
Yes.
Stephen Witten.
Yes.
Wendy Downey. Jessica Jones.
Aye.
Jennifer Andrews. Diane Stubbins.
Yes.
Nancy Bradley.
Aye.
Andy Cox.
Aye.
Peggy Schimler.
Aye.
Sarah Gross.
Aye.
Travis Burns.
Aye.
Cardell Patillo.
Aye.
Senator McClellan.
Aye.
Let's see. Have I missed anybody?
You missed me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Charlotta.
Aye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I vote aye as well. All right, we have 2 action items on the agenda today. The first is the review of proposed guidelines for the licensure requirements for cultural competency. So I'm going to turn that over to you, Patty.
Thank you, Tricia. And I do want to say thank you to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules for this called meeting. It was very important that we have this meeting today because a recommendation needs to be presented to the Board of Education next week, which is prior to our April meeting. So thank you all. Also want to thank Christania Brown for being with us. As she indicated, she is the coordinator of history and social science education with the Department of Education. She is certainly a huge asset to the department and such a wonderful colleague at the Department of Education. And she will speak briefly shortly in agenda item 2. I would like to give you some context for both of these agenda items before we begin. The 2021 General Assembly approved House Bill 1984, which is identical to Senate Bill 1196. And these bills are regarding cultural competent Virginia educators. And they have several components, and today we will address two. And I want to say for both of these items, the Board of Education will need to approve interim guidelines for licensure requirements. In both cases, these would be considered guidelines. The Board of Education, once they approve them, will have the Department of Education file them with the Registrar's Office. You may not be aware, but with any guidance documents, they are submitted and published for a 30-day period of time. Now, the Board of Education meets on April 22nd. The Board of Education could waive first review. As you know, they typically review items twice, first for first review, and then they act on them for final review. If they waive first review on these items, then they will be published in accordance with the registrar's schedule, and then there will be a 30-day comment period before they will become effective. So just wanted to give you the background for these two bills. And now let's move on to agenda item 1. I'm not going to read each of these items to you, but rather highlight some of the major points within them, because you have had them and I know that everyone has reviewed them prior to the meeting. But the first item will be the review of proposed Virginia Board of Education interim guidelines for licensure requirements and cultural competency. As we move forward, we feel that the board will develop permanent guidelines, but at this time they are interim. As you know, unless a bill states otherwise, it becomes effective July 1 of the year that it is passed. Therefore, these two bills, Senate Bill 1196 and House Bill 1904, become effective July 1 of this year. It's April, so July is quickly coming. So we have to be prepared, because as you will see in this statement, there is an excerpt from the bill. Every person who seeks an initial license or license renewal shall complete instruction or training in cultural competency. I would also like to call to your attention that we will advise school divisions that individuals who are ready for renewal really need to get those in before June 30, because any requirement that becomes effective July 1 would not impact them as long as they submit their renewal by June 30 of this year or request an initial license by that time. Also want to let you know that, and it's not part of our agenda today, but we will discuss it more at our meeting later this month, is there is another bill that is going to allow for a 2-year extension of licenses that expire this year. So that also will give some relief to individuals who've been unable to complete requirements due to the pandemic. But let's go ahead and get right to this particular item. And as I said, the licensure requirement becomes effective on July 1 of 2021. So those individuals seeking an initial license or renewal of a license on July 1 will need to complete this requirement. There is an additional excerpt here from the bill. This talks about cultural competency training that will be required of school boards that they will need to provide to licensed employees, but that is not the focus of our agenda item today. Just wanted to call your attention to that, because the Board of Education will need to provide additional guidance for school divisions in that regard, but that comes later in the year. Now let's go on to the requirements. Leah Walker is now joining us. I think she'll be on in just a second. I just admitted her. Good morning, Leah. We are looking at the cultural competency item now. Leah Walker is our Director of Equity and Community Engagement, and she was instrumental in the coordination and the writing of the interim guidelines. So Leah, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone.
So the background, I think many of you are familiar with Virginia's roadmap to equity and the framework and the work that we have been doing. I'm not going to go over all of this in detail, but if you have specific questions in this regard, Leah, who's just joined us, is the expert and can give you more context as well. As you know, the Board of Education did approve the guidelines for uniform performance standards and evaluation criteria for teachers. And the major change in the performance standards was a new performance standard that speaks directly to equity. And we've gone over that in detail at our last meeting. So I'm going to move down here to the area. You've got your terms, key terms that Leah has defined for you, which are very helpful to give you context to the requirement. Now, the professional development requirements that individuals will need to complete will need to include the competencies and the content that's set forth in this document, if approved by the Board of Education. Ultimately, this is a decision of the board. We are here today for you to, someone said that you can only see the agenda. Are you not seeing the?
Yes, only the agenda, Patty, right now.
Okay, let me see. Let me stop sharing and see if I can bring that back up. I apologize. Thank you for letting me know. We will try again. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Good. What I've done, I highlighted the requirements and demonstration of evidence for this particular requirement. So again, the requirement would become effective July 1, 2021, and only the options and evidence that the board approves can be used to meet this requirement. So individuals cannot complete other activities that are not approved by the Board of Education or the department to meet this requirement. So this is where we get into the recommendation. Effective July 1, 2021, educators are required to submit evidence of the completion of one of the following to meet the cultural competency requirement. And this would be, again, for individuals seeking initial license or license renewal effective July 1, 2021. The first would be a certificate of successful completion of the Department of Education's culturally responsive and inclusive educators professional learning program. So it would be, hold on, I need to admit someone there. So this would be a certificate very similar to the certificates that individuals do submit when they complete dyslexia training, et cetera, those statutory requirements. And second, certificate of successful completion of a cultural competency professional development program included in the Virginia Department of Education's published list of approved cultural competency professional development programs. So there will be a list of those approved professional development activities that one can complete. Currently, Leah is working with a couple of our institutions of higher education to provide the cultural competency training so it will be available on July 1.
Yeah, and Patty, if I can just follow on that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So what the initial plan is that we are in the early, well, not in the early stage processes, but in process of entering into an agreement with 2 institutions of higher education here in Virginia who will work together to actually develop a pilot Virginia professional learning program that aligns to the competencies set forth in these proposed guidelines. They will build that training and be able to deploy and deliver that training over the next year. They will also included in the scope of work is for them to do an evaluation of the learning outcomes, which will inform the final development of a statewide professional learning program that aligns to these standards. The reason we're taking that approach is that we really want to make sure that there is consistency and authenticity in the professional learning program that educators receive that align to this, both this guidelines that are before you here, as well as the new standard that was approved by the board for teacher evaluation. So you'll see here that there is an alignment between what we suggest here as the competencies that must be included in the professional learning program and the indicators that align to the new standard that the board approved last month. The scope of work that we're proposing for the 2 institutions of higher education that are working collaboratively on this is almost verbatim what you see here in front of you in terms of these guidelines. So we have a great deal of confidence that there will be a high quality professional learning program available to Virginia educators to meet this mandate. I see in the chat that there's a question about which institutions are going to be creating this training. Given that we don't have a signed agreement, I don't know that I want to necessarily say that. I will say that they represent 2 different regions of the state. They are both public institutions in Virginia, and they have experience with developing and deploying this type of professional learning.
Leah, do you have a sense of how long the training will be, will take teachers?
Yeah, I can't say if it will be, you know, a 90-day. We're really leaning on the expertise of the institutions to tell us what the timeline would be for completion of that training. What I can tell you is that it won't be a checkbox, right? We're really being very careful to not create a checkbox training for this type of content. There will be, they will have the opportunity. What we've asked them to build and design is a program that can be delivered virtually, but does also require that critical reflection and engagement in order to ensure that there is engagement with the content being delivered, that it's not just modules that you'll check through in an online platform and, you know, get a certificate printed out at the end. So we're looking at a combination type of program that will likely I imagine it will be cohorts that will start at the same time and finish at the same time, but with multiple cohorts running at various points of time in order to provide educators the opportunity to meet this requirement.
And will there be a cost associated for the candidates who go through this, or teachers?
Yeah, so we do have budget that allows for the department to subsidize the cost of this training. So for this pilot, we are funding at 100%, 3,000 educators to go through this initial pilot training. After that point in time, once we've reached the cap of the 3,000 in the budget, then it'll be a cost of about $45, which would either be assumed by the local school district or the individual.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And we're building the pilot as a micro-credential, so utilizing that same kind of formatting.
Patty, are we still thinking 15 points, or is that changed?
I think the number of points that individuals will receive will be dependent upon the Board of Education's ultimate guidance on the number of whether it's, you know, we assume that we'll continue with clock hours. So it would be aligned with the Board of Education's guidance in that regard. So the 15 points may be, that's a little different. You know, you're talking about over and above what we required for the statutory requirements, which we'll discuss at our next meeting. But what ABTEL was thinking about was requiring an additional 15 clock hours in addition to this particular requirement. So we don't know how many hours a person will be engaged in this activity. But if we're using the model that is currently approved by the board, the approximate number of hours would equate to the number of clock hours, professional development points that one would earn for renewal.
I'm a little uncomfortable with them having to pay to do this. We haven't had that in the past with some of these statutory requirements. And, you know, and I think of my students, and by the time they've paid for all of their testing and then their license and then another $45, I mean, it's a lot for them to have to do. And so that piece of it, I'm not real comfortable with.
I will say that individuals are currently paying for the first aid, CPR, and use of AED training requirement, unless a school division is offering that to individuals who are employed.
But even that can be a stretch for students. I can tell you from, regardless of the institution I'm at, anything extra that comes out of their, you know, that they have to pay for licensure can be a barrier. And so I think it's something we really need to consider when, you know, because teachers don't make a whole lot of money. And so the more things that they have to pay for, you know, the harder it is to renew that license.
That could be a recommendation. Certainly the Board of Education does not appropriate funds. That's the General Assembly, but there could be a caveat in your recommendation if you want to make that suggestion that ABTEL's preference would be that individuals would not have to pay for this training. But at this point, that's not the case. At this point during the pilot, we will be able to subsidize this professional development training. However, how that will be paid in the future would be something that would have to be viewed.
So what we're proposing in the pilot, as I said, is that the department will pay the cost for the initial 3,000 individuals that go through, prioritizing certainly those who are seeking initial licensure and need to have a renewal during this time period. Beyond that, we do have an appropriation in the budget that is ongoing to support this provision in the law. There are obviously some one-time costs associated with developing training, right, and keeping it relevant over time. But we will have funds available to continue to support educators' acquisition of this training long-term. I think it's just too soon for us to say what an actual cost might look like for educators once we're fully ramped up, once the board has completed its work in this space and finished the regulatory process on this. But there was an appropriation in the budget. It's a little over $200,000 annually that was appropriated to support educators receiving or meeting this requirement. Because again, there's the initial licensure requirement, the renewal requirement, as well as the requirement for license holders every 2 years. And so we'll be looking at how we can maximize certainly that investment that the state's already made and build the program in a way that I can't say that I think it will be no cost to educators. I think there will likely be a cost, but I think we're going to do everything that we can to build a system where we can keep it as affordable as possible.
Patty, do you foresee at some point these guidelines being written into the approved programs so that programs can deliver these similar to the way we address competencies for licensure?
That's certainly something that could be reviewed at a later time.
And we do have, so there's a lot of different, I keep using this analogy of there are several different trains all heading to the same station, right, working on this topic. And one of those other trains is the committee, the Culturally Responsive and Inclusive Educator Practices Advisory Committee, very long name. I get tongue-tied every time I say it, which was mandated by the legislature the prior year. So in not this General Assembly session, but the year before that. That committee has been meeting, and one of the things that committee was charged with doing was making recommendations to educator preparation programs and the approval of educator preparation programs related to ensuring that we have culturally proficient educators entering into the Virginia workforce. And so that committee will also be making recommendations to the General Assembly and the governor. And it's timed up so that those recommendations will be available to the governor and legislature prior to the formation of the governor's outgoing budget, so that if there are costs associated with that, they can make a budget recommendation related to that as well. But just so you all are aware, there's kind of another group. The work is still all going to be in alignment. We're making sure that we don't have separate groups doing work with under sort of different competencies, and we want to make sure that it is consistent and everything aligns to each other. But that group has actually been charged with addressing the EPP component of this. And I think Andrew Dare is here this morning, and Dr. Dare is actually the chair of that subcommittee. So if you have anything you wanted to add on that, Dean Dare.
The only thing that I would add is that we're really wanting to ensure that our educator preparation programs are really keeping up with what we're expecting for our educators in the classroom, and to ensure that we're doing the work in higher ed to ensure that we're preparing those educators to meet I would say to meet the expectations that we have for those educators in the classroom and for educational leaders.
And I would also want to add that the reason that these are interim guidelines is because there are many requirements that are going to intersect. So as we move forward, we will, the Board of Education will need to develop new guidance. But this is an interim step at this point. And as Leah said, we do have the funds for next year, and it appears that those individuals who are seeking an initial license or license renewal, based upon the data that we have pulled, it should be sufficient to cover the cost for this year.
And I will say, I understand that covering the cost for this year, but even the first aid and training that they have to do, that's hands-on. It's usually somebody outside the school system. They have to have that kind of face-to-face time, but to have modules that they have to go through and then pay $45 for, I really struggle with. We don't do that for dyslexia. We don't do it for the child abuse and prevention training. And so the $45 to me is a huge issue, just because of the struggle that is for teachers. And I don't want it to become a pattern that when we add a new requirement to licensure that they now have to pay for it because they're already paying for the license.
Nancy, I'm with Nancy. And Nancy, there already are. The state has absolutely butchered the public education budget over the last 7 to 10 years and has done very little to restore that to where it was. We don't even get the same slice of the pie from the state budget as we used to get. So they cut the piece of the pie we get, then they cut the budget on that sliver of the pie. And on top of that, we're constantly laying these unfunded mandates on school systems and teachers. And you're talking about a profession that's already in short supply. Okay, we can't get them, and they're already underpaid, and we're lumping these fees on top of them. To me, if the state thinks it is that important, then the state needs to fund it, period, from onset until forever. The state needs to fund. The state needs to put their money where their mouth is and fund this program and all subsequent programs that they're putting into the field of education. You got to put your money where you're saying it's important.
Gary, I'm 100% with you. I serve on a school board as well.
I am chair of the school board. I've been on the school board for 9 years, 6 years as chair, and I have dealt with this budget mess, and it's ridiculous. The state has already squeezed as much blood out of the turnip as they can get. And the state needs to suck it up and fund whatever it is they say is important for public education, period. And it
do
frustrates me because I've had to deal with the budget for, it is very, very frustrating for me. The state needs to suck it up and deal with it, fund it if it's important.
Just to reiterate, so that everyone is clear too, the $45 is what the cost, anticipated cost would be for individuals in this pilot. After the pilot, as Leah said, the General Assembly has appropriated funding. Now, we cannot say at this point whether it would be totally free based upon that funding. But as you can see from the guidelines, there are options to complete the training that is offered. And Leah has also indicated that we will have a list of other professional development programs that individuals can complete to meet this. For now, for the next year, here's that we have the money that we will need to meet the cost of this requirement, but you're absolutely correct. It is something that we're going to have to look at beyond the year.
And to Tricia's point, I mean, like we have a course called Culture Responsive Teaching and Classroom Management. And so it seems odd that our students could take that class and then still have to pay $45 to do a module when they've already paid for a course in that content. You know, I mean, I guess that's, you know, part of it, because Tricia was talking about, is it eventually just going to be part of our regulations that our students have to meet?
Well, as we move forward, all of those requirements, both for individuals who are in approved programs, for individuals who are completing requirements in local school divisions, individuals seeking licensure, individuals who are not currently employed who also need to meet this requirement, all of those there needs to be some alignment. So Tricia, I'm going to turn it over to you to see if there are any more questions and see if there is a recommendation or motion regarding this item.
Okay, thank you, Patty.
You're welcome.
Is there any further discussion regarding the requirements and demonstration of evidence? That is on the last page, page 8 of your agenda item 1. So this is a reminder that this is an interim requirement. Is there a motion to recommend approval?
Tricia, before we get to that,
yes,
would it be appropriate as a recommending board to motion or maybe even vote on an idea that we're strongly worried about the costs associated with this? Would that be appropriate now, or is that something that should be come up later on?
I think Patty in the past has been very good about expressing our concerns to the board. Patty, is there a way that you would like us to do that?
I think that's, you may want to make a recommendation after we complete these, both of these items, but if you wanted to make a motion pertaining to agenda item 1 and 2 and make some statement that, because what I'm hearing is that ABTEL would support training that would be provided free of charge to teachers, that's certainly the message that you would want to send. However you want to do it, if you'd rather attach it to each one of these separately, you can do it however you feel appropriate.
Okay.
I do have a question. I put it in the chat. What will be available to initial licensure candidates who will graduate and who will complete their all requirements in August? It doesn't sound like this will be available prior to that.
It will be available no later than July 1, but the law does say that anyone seeking an initial license after July 1 would need to meet the requirements. So that would mean that someone who graduates in August would need to meet this requirement.
Yes.
So are they going to be able, I guess my concern is that I have multiple students in this situation. And if I have to say to them, you cannot apply for a license until when, they're going to want a timeline. So if it's available July 1, are they going to be able to complete it prior to August 30th?
I would, go ahead, Patty.
Leah, go ahead. You can, Leah was going to respond.
Yeah, so couple of things. Everybody who knows me knows I talk very plainly and that I am like a truth teller, right? We are also concerned about the effective date of the law, but it is the law in Virginia and there's nothing we can actually do to change that. We can't change the effective date of July 1. The law was passed and it has been signed by the governor and it goes into effect on July the 1st. What we are doing at the department is building something that will be available to educators as quickly as we possibly can, given the fact that the bill is going into effect on July the 1st. We are working aggressively with our partners to ensure that that training will be available on July 1st date. I would say that I cannot guarantee that educators will be able to enroll July 1st and be done by August 1st, right? Because we're talking about something that is not a module that you're just going to click through to hit a checkbox to say that you've received it. Because we know our licenses last for 10 years. So we do want to make sure that there's high quality associated with the training that our educators are receiving. But we are working very, very hard to make sure that it can be accomplished. You know, we're not looking at it being a 6-month process or a year-long process for educators to meet this requirement. I am not going to say here today what that timeframe will be, because I'm going to rely on the information we receive from our experts who are experienced in building professional learning programs for adults that will align to the guidelines that the board is going to approve. As soon as we have that information, we will share it with you all. We anticipate closing out the negotiations on those contracts in the next week or so. And so we're happy to provide an update in writing to you all once we have a better sense of what that timeline will be. And we will be sharing it with educators. We're doing a bulletin this week to all license seekers and license holders, making them aware of the new requirements. And we will continue to inform the field as soon as we have a better sense of what that timeline will be. The goal certainly is to get as many educators to meet the requirement as quickly as possible, because we don't want to contribute to teacher shortages in any way with this new requirement.
Leah, should we assume that this training means that there will be a live person on the other end responding to the cohorts who are in this training?
Yes, that is the request that we included in the development of the pilot. It is not going to be 100% online. You know, there will be an instructor for every single cohort that goes through this training. And I think
it will be completed virtually.
Yeah, they'll be able to complete it virtually, but there will be a live instructor. So it won't be like, you know, I don't know, like for us, when we do our cybersecurity training, we're just watching slides, clicking through them, answering a couple questions. This is not going to be that. One of the things that we will think about going forward, though, is, you know, we built a pilot where we are fully paying the $45 rate for a micro-credential for 3,000 educators. When we develop the longer term professional learning program, you know, we may decide that we're not going to fully cover the cost of any educators, but reduce the cost so that it's $10 per person or something like that. I don't know. That's something that we certainly can work collaboratively with ABTEL on what will be best for the field in terms of how we subsidize that cost. But in building the pilot, we're confident that what the sponsored slots that we're providing will be sufficient to meet the immediate need.
Tricia, this is Nancy Welch. May I make a suggestion for the group?
Yes, please.
And Patty, help me out with this with my timeline. If I recall correctly, Dr. Lane, our state superintendent for public instruction, has the ability to put waivers in place up until June 30th of this year. If that timeline is correct, I might make a suggestion for ABTEL to consider that we ask Dr. Lane to do a 1-year waiver for the students who are currently in the teacher preparation programs that would allow flexibility while this competency module is being built. It seems to me that we're placing many educators that are in preparation programs in jeopardy of not completing or being able to complete. And I think that this might be a fair way to give them the ability to still be a completer, to still have a license issued through a waiver process. But also give Leah and her team and with our higher education partners the ability to create a worthwhile program for all educators.
I think that could be something that can be considered later for August graduates. I'm not sure that individuals who are graduating beyond that would not have sufficient time to do this. But that could be something that could be considered.
Trish, I have a question of Leah.
Sure.
In building the pilot program, would it be possible to allow students who are going through the teacher preparation program to be a part of that? Or a subsection of that, because it's open to 3,000 educators? Could there be a portion of that that goes to our higher education for students to be able to participate?
There would be nothing that would prohibit students who are currently enrolled in the IHE from participating. What we have asked the vendors to do in the scope of work is to prioritize the sponsored enrollment slots for educators who are needing this requirement immediately to meet their initial licensure or renewal requirements.
And those individuals would be included in that priority. As anyone who is seeking an initial license or license renewal in Virginia would be priority for this pilot.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any additional discussion? I do see support for adding language about cost, and I think we would need a motion first to approve, and then I think we can add the language in if somebody would like to make a motion. Or we can move.
So Patty, I just have a quick question that the request for ABTEL to make a position statement related to the cost of this training would not appear in the actual guidelines, right? Because these would be, okay, just making sure, yeah.
No, it would not. It basically, ABTEL, if they approve the guidance to move forward to the board as their recommendation, they would recommend approval, but as a second item that they would just recommend that the department as well as the board consider the cost and the impact to potential teachers as well as educators renewing their license.
So can we first entertain a motion to recommend approval of the requirements and demonstration of evidence as written on page 8 of agenda item 1?
And Tricia, it would be the entire guidance document, not just what's showing, but all of that is it, including the actual competencies that I'm scrolling through now. Sorry to interrupt, Tricia. Thank you.
No, thank you. So motion to approve the interim guidelines for licensure requirements in cultural competency. The draft attached to the agenda item.
This is Jessica Jones. I moved.
Nancy Welch, second.
Nancy seconds. Thank you. All right. Andrew Dare.
Yay. Yes.
Nancy Welch.
Yes.
Gary Carter.
Aye.
Charlotta Williams.
Yes.
Mary McIntyre.
Yes.
Steve Whitten.
Yes.
Wendy Downey.
Yes.
Jessica Jones.
Aye.
Jennifer Andrews.
Sorry, aye.
Diane Stebbins.
Yes.
Nancy Bradley. Nancy Bradley,
Aye. My unmute didn't work, sorry.
Andy Cox,
Aye.
Peggy Schindler,
Aye.
Sarah Gross,
Aye.
Travis Burns,
Aye.
Cardell Patillo,
Aye.
Senator McClellan,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you for that. Is there a motion with a statement about the cost that someone would like to make?
Trish, I would like to make that motion.
Thank you, Andy. Go ahead.
And you'll have to help me with the wording on this, but
Okay.
something along the lines of I recommend the Virginia Department of Ed and the Virginia Board of Education consider the cost associated with new requirements.
Thank you. So the motion would be that ABTEL recommends the Department of Education and the Board of Education consider eliminating associated costs, or consider
I like the word eliminating. I think that's a good way to make it firm.
eliminating a cost associated with this requirement for initial licensure or renewal. Does that work?
It does.
Thank you.
I'll
Andy.
second.
Second, Nancy Bradley. All right. Andrew Dare. I should ask, is there a discussion on the motion?
Clarify that we're trying to eliminate the cost to the actual licensee, or because I feel like if we're saying eliminate the cost, that is muddying the waters. Cost for whom?
Maybe perhaps additional, consider eliminating costs for applicants for initial licensure or renewal. Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you.
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
So would this mean that school divisions could actually pay the cost? I'm just trying to understand this, because I do have some concern with eliminating cost, because when you eliminate cost, you're probably going to also eliminate value. And then, you know, for someone who's going to be providing this, if we're, you know, I'm just concerned that something so important that we might be making a decision that's going to lead to watered down and unimpactful content. Now, I do agree that, you know, we do have to be concerned about the costs for professional development. You know, and one question that I do have is, you know, do we have a statement like this for other professional development activities? And then the second, and I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, that, you know, I think it would be appropriate for school divisions to be able to cover the cost of this professional development for their employees.
That's another unfunded mandate that you're putting on the school systems who are already strapped. They are having to pull money from the local government's hand over fist. And that's not so bad for somebody like Alexandria or some of the larger school systems, but these smaller school systems are just getting hammered. How about the state will incur all costs for such training, period. That way you're still getting the cost, but the state's simply going to pay it and the applicant does not have to pay it. The state will incur all costs for such training.
I agree 100% with Gary.
I'm not sure we can mandate that, and maybe eliminate isn't the word. Perhaps the word is that perhaps our motion needs to state that we have concerns about teachers and initial licensure candidates incurring additional costs.
True. Very
to
true.
apply for their license.
Very true.
Is that a better way to say it? Andy,
Yeah.
do you want to reframe your motion? I may have muddied the waters a bit in my language.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to word it so it basically means to minimize those costs. And
Can
So
you
both
just say
Mary
defer costs?
So both Mary and Sarah, I'm sorry, Jessica, have put language in the chat that I think is helpful. Is there something there, Andy, that would work? I'm sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
Well, what we're trying to do is pretty much defer costs from the individual applicant. And I think that's as clear as day. How it is deferred, we're leaving alone because we can't tell the state that you will pay for it, but we can say defer the cost so the individual doesn't have it themselves to pay.
Right.
And it's going to fall back on the local school systems. I'm telling you, we have so many unfunded mandates right now that it is absurd. The state is just one right after the other, just hammering us with these unfunded mandates. So somewhere, what about we suggest? I don't know, but I do not want the cost of this or any subsequent mandatory training to fall on the shoulders of the individual or the school system. So how we want to say, I mean, I don't know how we say it either. So I'm just going to be quiet because y'all know how I feel.
But I agree with Gary. Serving on a small school board, if we have to start spending extra money for every individual going through, I mean, it's hard enough to even meet the matches to get the raises that they need. That's
what I was going to say. That's going to break us this year. We're having to go back to city council just so that we can accommodate the raises, or we lose all that money that the state wonderfully gave us. But it's just a smidgen of what we actually need to put the raises in place.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt. I apologize. A couple people have their hands up, so I'm going to call on folks. So if you have something to contribute, please do that. Senator McClellan, I'm going to let you speak, and then Jennifer, you are next.
Yeah, so I 100% agree that we should express our view that the cost should not be passed on to the teachers or the localities. I think we need to phrase it, though, in a way that recognizes who is the entity that has to do it. It is not the Board of Education. It is not the Department of Education. It's the General Assembly. Mm-hmm. There is likely to be a special session this summer where we will in part figure out how to appropriate the funding we get from the latest federal recovery plan. And so I think however we phrase it, it needs to be targeted at the General Assembly. And so maybe it is that ABTEL recommends that the Board of Education or the Department of Education, seek funding so that the cost will not fall on the teachers. But I think if we just say to the board, the practical effect of the motion I heard is, board, you pay for it. The board doesn't have the authority to do that if they don't have the money. So let's make sure we are targeting the body that has or can provide the money, and that is the General Assembly.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Oh, I agree 100% with Senator McClellan. I put my hand up a while back in terms of we needed to make sure that we're not, this motion expresses our grave concern about additional cost being borne by applicants as well as the school board. I mean, I agree with Gary about the school boards totally. My license will be renewed in the next year. I mean, after July 1, I'm going to have to pay a cost to DOE to have that license processed. So I'm paying a cost already. The way that the original language was phrased made it sound to me like there wouldn't be any cost. And I don't think that that's what the intent was. I definitely agree that you don't want to be adding costs on one after another in order to get your license. And I thought the comment in the chat about having a fee for the coursework for, or the module, whatever we're going to call it, for cultural responsive instruction, and then not having one for other things is inappropriate. You should either fund them all of the modules that you have to take. Like when I take the civics module, it doesn't cost me any money. But I will need to pay a cost for the first aid and AED training. So you either should make it equitable, that we're not paying any additional fees beyond the cost of your license, or we've already agreed, I think, that to have fees for all of these requirements definitely hurts, especially our students, definitely hurts school systems if they have to cover the cost. So anyway, thanks.
So I know we have another agenda item to discuss. So Andy, do you have some revised language that you would like us to consider for a motion?
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm working on it right now. So you may have to give me a minute on.
Okay. So Jessica also has put in the chat, ABTEL recommends the Virginia Board of Education seek funding from the Virginia General Assembly to cover costs associated for individuals seeking an initial license or licensure renewal in Virginia to meet the cultural competency requirement. I do think we want some language about the costs. I like the language that Sarah added about costs associated with the requirement should not be placed on individual educators or school divisions, if you want to say it that way. Would you like us to come back to this after we discuss the next agenda item?
Please.
Is that all right with everyone if we move on so that we can get through this one? All right. So Patty, agenda item 2, which is the review of the interim guidelines for licensure requirements in African American history.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and bring up item 2. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Okay, let's try it again.
There we go.
Okay, good. All right, let me just get my list here. Okay. The background is very similar with this item. This too resulted from Senate Bill 1196 and House Bill 1904. As I indicated, there were several requirements within these bills, and the one that is before you now is a requirement that every person seeking initial licensure or renewal of a license with an endorsement in history and social sciences shall complete instruction in African American history as prescribed by the Board of Education. This requirement is for only those individuals with the endorsement in history and social sciences, that broad comprehensive endorsement. So anyone seeking that license or license renewal with that endorsement would need to meet this requirement. And this too becomes effective July 1 of 2021. So it's quickly approaching us. And Christania Brown has worked with us closely and to develop some interim guidelines proposed for your review today. She does give the background. I'm not going to read this to you as you've already read that. Just note again that these will be interim guidelines, and it is anticipated that the Board of Education will develop additional guidelines in the future to replace these. I've highlighted in red the evidence or how this requirement can be completed. And it's important to note that probably most individuals who already have the history and social sciences endorsement have not taken a course in African American history. So I think that is important context as we move forward. So let me go over the options.
Patty, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have a different draft than you are showing. Our evidence, ours looks a little different. There's 3 bullet points under demonstration of evidence.
Okay,
I'm looking at the wrong page.
Yeah, there it is. It's
okay. Bottom. Yeah, thank you.
No, that's easy to do. We've had so many different drafts as we move forward, so I certainly understand. There are options, and then there are ways to demonstrate the evidence. So that's what Tricia was referring to. So educators seeking an initial license or license renewal effective July 1, 2021, with an endorsement in history and social sciences may meet the requirement by either successfully completing the Virginia Department of Education African American History course for educators, and Kristania will tell you a little bit more about how that will be accomplished and how it will be available virtually, or submitting documentation of the demonstration of evidence in each required objective as set forth in the guidelines. Now, then you would ask, how do you do that? There are 3 ways in which a person could submit evidence of the completion of the requirements. One would be the certificate of the completion of the Department of Ed African American History course for educators, or it could be a letter from a dean, from an accredited college or university, attesting to the fact that the individual was an instructor who taught African American history within the most recent 10 years of the licensure request. The 10 years comes from the fact that we're currently issuing 10-year licenses. Renewals are now for 10 years. Or an individual could submit an official transcript of the successful completion of an African American history course, which must be taken from an undergraduate, from an accredited college or university at the undergraduate or graduate level within the most recent 10 years of the licensure request. So whenever they make the request, the coursework either taught by someone in higher ed or coursework completed must have been completed within the most recent 10-year period. And again, you have read the requirements and have had this before you about what that content includes. I'm just scrolling through very quickly, and then I will go back again to the requirements here. Kristania, would you like to briefly explain to ABTEL how we will proceed with the Department of Education African American History course?
Yes, good morning, everyone. You may or may not know that currently the Virginia Department of Education has sponsored a pilot program for African American history, the elective that the department developed in conjunction with WHRO, Public Media, and Virtual Virginia. Currently, we now have 17 teachers in 16 school divisions that are in that pilot program. The course was developed as a blended model where we have teachers who teach the students, and then also there are online modules that students are able to go through. What we plan to do in order to meet this July 1st deadline is to take those online modules and retrofit them, I guess you could say, or modify them for the adult learner. Our initial goal is to have someone, an instructor that would be able to interact with teachers, but knowing that we have a quick turnaround on this, the first initial or interim guidelines, the course itself will be mainly asynchronous. And then as we build up the guidelines, we are hoping to work with WHROs and also contract history professors to teach the class, teach the course. They will be available in online modules. At this time, I do not have a timeline as to exactly how long going through all of these modules will take. We will be working with WHRO to get an idea of the number of modules and how long it should take a teacher or a teacher seeking an initial license to get through these modules. So we're hoping to have all of this ready I'm giving them a deadline of June 1st to modify the modules that we have for students to make them fit for the adult learner so that we can go through and make sure everything is ready for July 1st. So that's what we have so far. And currently right now, there is no cost to teachers seeking a license or renewal. That's it, Patty.
Thank you, Christine. Appreciate that. I'll turn it back over to you, Tricia.
Is she muted?
See if she's, I think maybe she, let's see if she's still on. Hello. Can you try to get back in? Okay, thank you. Right. That was Tricia. She got kicked off of Zoom. She is going to.
I'm back. Sorry about that.
Oh, there she is. She's back.
Huh. And I'm sorry, Christine. Maybe it was me. Maybe I was the reason that you were freezing on me. I don't know.
Tricia, the only thing that I would add that I think you might have missed because it looked like you were off, Christine, you did say that there currently is no cost for the virtual tutorial or virtual course.
Yeah. And no, you have no estimate of time yet, you did say, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Can I ask, so this is not required for the middle school endorsement. It's only required through secondary 6 through 12. So for those who might like to take it, will there be an opportunity for them to do so?
There will be an opportunity. Right now, our first concern are the teachers seeking initial licensure and also those for renewal. So hopefully over this next year, we'll be able to have everything ready so that any teacher who wants to go through the instruction would have access to the modules.
Thank you. Are there questions that anyone has for Christania? Or any discussion? Yes, Wendy.
Hi. Would there be a way that once that is open to all teachers, would they be able to use that training for those teachers who do not require it to use that as part of their recertification for their license?
We had not explored that. I can definitely take that back to leadership and then also work with Patty as a part of the overall requirements for licensure. I think everyone should, but I'm biased, should take the course or have the instruction. So I really do not want to limit it to just those teachers seeking history and social science endorsements.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other questions? Steve, please.
Thank you. Again, a concern with this July 1 date, if you're on your last year of your license, and I know in Mecklenburg, we have to have all our points in by March 1, would someone that needs this class for recertification be able to get that class the first semester, basically, of the school year?
Steve, I can respond to that. I think it's important to note that an individual whose license expires this year will not be subject to this requirement. So if the license expires June 30 of 2021, the individual will not need to meet this requirement. It becomes effective July 1 of 2021. So as long as they get their renewal application into our office by that date, they will not need to meet this requirement. There's also another piece of legislation that will allow us to extend a license for an additional 2 years that expires June 30 of 2021 to give individuals additional time to meet requirements. So that will give some relief to individuals who may not have met renewal requirements, however, or other requirements as well. It doesn't say it has to be a renewable license. It's any license that will expire, a Board of Education license that will expire on June 30 of this year. But individuals who are applying for an initial license after July 1 would need to meet this requirement based upon the passage of the legislation. So good question. But that gives some clarity on those people who are trying to renew now. It does get to be a little confusing because people generally say their license expires July 1, but technically it's June 30. And this becomes effective the following day.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
I was so caught up in Steve's question. My license expires June 30th, 2022. So I will have to do that, do this coursework or this module. Oh, I know what it was. If I could ask Christania, how have the modules been going? How have the courses been going in the pilot program?
They have been going wonderfully. Our students really love the online modules because there are so many different accommodations for the modules. For example, text that is presented in the modules can be read to them. There are many interactivities that students have an opportunity to go through. So it's not a sit and get type of situation for them. And then the way in which we built the modules coincide with the face-to-face learning. It either supports what has already been taught or it previews what they will be learning. They have many different opportunities. It's not just multiple choice, for example, assessments. There are multiple ways for students to demonstrate their understanding, and there's a lot of student choice. The biggest thing that we're going to have to do is those types of activities that are built for students to kind of modify them or upscale them for the adult learner. I'm sure that adults would love some of the activities, but keeping in mind of time that teachers have, we really want them to be more reflective of the content and how they teach the content rather than the activities that we take students through. But they've been going really, really great.
Great. So, and I definitely agree. I'm glad to hear that mine is teaching the pilot course at Henrico High School.
Yes.
So Steve's point was, so I am in this group that will have to do this module. In Henrico, they also want you to get your, if you're up for renewal, they want you to get your points in as soon as possible. I already have 180 points, which because I currently hold a 5-year license. But I would have to be able to get this module done, say in the first semester before December, so that things can be wrapped up properly and get processed through Henrico's department that handles licensure before passing it on to DOE.
Yes.
So I think that was what Steve's point was, that you have to make sure if you're up for renewal, you have to make sure you get those requirements done early on.
Yes. And we definitely need to keep that in mind because of the collection of evidence for the entire renewal, keeping in mind that teachers may have many things that they need to collect, but we do want to make sure that the purpose, that the course, the modules serve the purpose as put forth by the intent of the legislation. So trying to make that balance, find that balance rather, I will be meeting with WHRO, as a matter of fact, this week, so that we can discuss those time constraints that we need to put on this instruction so that it's beneficial and in time for people to turn in their points for relicensure.
Right.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Mary.
Hi, thanks. So I really, I love all the detail that was included in this, and I'm intrigued by it too, even though I'm not licensed in history. It makes me want to learn more and hopefully get to take one of these courses. I was curious, just thinking back to our previous conversation about the cultural competency requirement. We were talking about that one being a live, interactive training with a teacher or an instructor. And of course, that means that person needs to be paid, and they should be paid fairly for their work. And so I'm wondering, this one, how does this compare in terms of hours to the other training? And what makes this one, I guess, easier to be done not live with an instructor?
Our ultimate goal is for it not to necessarily be just asynchronous. I don't believe that this course should be taken without a live instructor on the end. But for the interim, we do have the modules built already, so we're not starting from scratch. That's one thing. Ultimately, we would like to have an instructor go along with this course, because again, that reflective piece, there's a lot of content here that many teachers probably have never come in contact with. There's a lot of history here that many teachers have probably never come in contact with. And having what we've learned, I will say, from the pilot program, we meet with those teachers at least once a month. And just the cohort itself, teachers being able to communicate with one another in that live setting, they need that. So we do recognize that that is something that needs a component that needs to be there, but we also have to think about the time constraints and then also how we will contract and pay for an instructor to be with the teacher. So that's something that we will need to work out. But as far as the interim is concerned, we do have enough there with the modules to where the teachers, it's not ideal at all. It is enough there to where they can right now do it asynchronously. And it might be something that I myself or one of the professors from the African American History Education Commission may be able to work with us to be that touch point for the teachers as they're going through the modules. Again, it's not ideal. It is not something that we want to have totally asynchronous to where you just go through the modules and boom, you have African American history instruction. So we do need to have an instructor there for them. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, so it seems like this, the content of this training is more hammered out or is already more defined than the content of the previous requirement, right?
Yeah, only because we've had that pilot for this past year.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Not a problem.
Are there other questions for Kristania? Would anyone like to move that ABTEL recommend the interim guidelines for the African American history requirement for both initial licensure and licensure renewal for those with an endorsement in history and social science?
I so move.
Thank you, Peggy. Is there a second?
Second, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer. Nancy Welch.
Yes.
Harry Carter.
Aye.
Mary McIntyre.
Yes.
Steve Whitten.
Yes.
Wendy Downey.
Yes.
Jessica Jones.
Aye.
Jennifer Andrews.
Aye.
Diane Stubbins.
Aye.
Nancy Bradley,
Aye.
Andy Cox,
Aye.
Peggy Schimler,
Aye.
Sarah Gross,
Aye.
Travis Burns, Cardell Patillo,
Aye.
Senator McClellan.
Aye.
And I vote yes as well. So I'd like to return, Andy, do you have a motion for us? I know there was some helpful language.
Yeah, I just posted something. It's funny is that I'm never at a loss for words until I need them. So
ABTEL strongly recommends the VDOE and Virginia Board of Education consider minimizing costs associated to the individual and the school district when new licensing training programs are required.
that's about as good as what I could come up with. You guys certainly.
Okay.
That's
Andy's motion. Is there a second?
Second, Nancy Bradley.
Thank you, Nancy. Is there discussion? All right, so the motion is to send this language along with the recommendations for these two sets of interim guidelines. So Nancy Welch.
Yes.
Gary Carter.
Aye.
Mary McIntyre.
Yes.
Steve Whitten.
Yes.
Wendy Downey.
Yes.
Jessica Jones.
Aye.
Jennifer Andrews.
Aye.
Diane Stubbins.
Aye.
Nancy Bradley.
Aye.
Andy Cox.
Aye.
Peggy Schimler.
Aye.
Sarah Gross.
Aye.
Travis Burns. Cardell Patillo.
Aye.
Senator McClellan.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you all for that work. Patty, I know you had something you wanted to share with us before we entertain a motion to adjourn.
Right, just one brief item, and that regards the Board of Education's retreat. The Board of Education will have its annual retreat next week, and they will be looking at the performance standards, evaluation criteria, the history, the context of those requirements as they are moving toward phase 3 of that process. They will also discuss professional development, and renewal will likely be a topic that will come up in the discussion. Just wanted to let you know that in our discussions with internal folks in the Department of Education about the development of the renewal requirements, we do think it may be advisable for ABTEL to consider in those categories where individuals will need to meet the requirements that they should be more aligned to the performance standards. They're pretty close now, but there could be some additional tweaking when we bring back a document for your review in April. So I just wanted to urge you to please review that document carefully when it comes to you, but that we feel that the board's direction is to align all of the initiatives related to professional development with those performance standards for teachers, principals, and superintendents. So thank
Patty,
you.
I'm sorry, Patty.
Sure.
My question is, if an RFP is going out for the complete overhaul of the evaluation system,
yes,
should we be aligning to standards that may not exist in another year? Has the board considered that?
Well, even though the Board of Education did approve the guidelines for teachers and it was done on an interim basis, going through an RFP process is going to be long. So we imagine that the board will take at least 6 months to discuss what they would like to see in a request for proposals for this work. And as you know, going through the teacher, principal, and superintendent evaluation process and engaging educators statewide and associations. We imagine that this is going to take a few years to do.
Okay, thank
So
you.
we do think that it is important for us to move forward with recommendations for licensure, because individuals have been issued 10-year licenses and are waiting to find out exactly what they must do in detail for renewal of their licenses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any announcements or anything else we need to discuss before we entertain a motion to adjourn? A reminder that we will be seeing each other again in 2 weeks on the 26th of April at 9 a.m. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Steve Whitten, so move.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
Second, Gary Carter.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you all for your work this morning. It is most appreciated. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Patty.
Thanks, Trish.
Thank you
Thank
all
you,
for
Tricia.
participating.
Thank you, Patty.
today.
Have a good day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. You too. Bye-bye.
We'll see you in 2 weeks, Patty. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.